Welcome to Building Community. I'm your host, Donna Rodriguez. In today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation about HIV and AIDS, the importance of early detection, and what it means to be living with HIV. I'm joined by Patrick Langone, a holistic healer and advocate who is living with HIV, and Ashley Frazier, case manager and anonymous testing counselor from BID Plymouth Access Program. Thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me, Ash.
You know, we're really happy to be able to talk to people about the realities of what it is like to live with HIV and the importance of early testing.
Mm-hmm.
In our first episode, we talked about the fact that we're 34 years in.
Mm-hmm.
It was 34 years ago that the first case was diagnosed. Let's just start off by talking about what's the same and what's changed.
I think it was a very big topic back in the 80s, and it sort of has fallen off a little bit. It's still very much there, though, definitely.
And that was the reason we've talked about this before. This is the reason we wanted to do these episodes, because when I realized that we don't hear people talking about HIV and AIDS anymore, I was scared. You know, if you don't, and you said
I was
silence equals
especially
death.
scared. Silence equals death. It's a big topic in the gay community as well as the general community, because the rates are spreading equally in both communities now, and nobody wants to talk about it.
Right.
And in the early 80s, I tested positive in 1985, and in the early 80s, nobody was talking about it at all. Even in our own community, the stigma was the fear in our community was so strong and so palpable. And the stigma is still there, very much, even in the gay community as well as in the community in general. But some of the things have changed because of drug therapies. People don't feel, that it is a death sentence anymore. And also, there's a lot of young people out there that are hearing about this new PrEP program, which is a prophylactics, which hopefully will help. But getting the word out there is the big thing. One of the reasons I wanted to come today is I wanted to let people know that, it's not a death sentence anymore. And if they need support, there is support out there. We have groups for long-term survivors. We have groups for younger kids that are just testing positive, because it's a life-changing event, and you do need that support.
And you told me when we talked previous to this show that, people have asked you in the past, would you wish to relive your life and not have HIV? And you had a really profound response to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, if you want to make me cry. I would not change it. Part of what has developed me into who I am today, a holistic healer, was the fact that at an early age I had to change my belief systems in a radically different way. I was a very different person at that time, and it made me become very introspective about my life and how I wanted to live what little life I had. Because in the early years, when we were told that we were positive, actually you weren't told you were positive, because it was still called ARC. You had ARC or AIDS.
AIDS-related complex.
And they basically told you, get your stuff in order. And that was all we got for support in the early years, so we had to depend upon the community. I made some beautiful bonds in those communities. We stuck by each other. And what I'd like to see happen now in the community is that it begins again, that we're sticking by each other, because we need that. We need to know that there's support out there, and that you're not alone, and that you're not going to take this struggle on as your own.
Do you find that for the younger generations who maybe didn't live through the middle 80s into the early 90s, do you think it's a different experience, or they have different expectations than people who lived through the mid-80s when HIV was first discovered?
Most definitely. In the early 80s, when it was first discovered, we were actually, as a community, in the gay community, Stonewall was just 10 years before that. So we were just getting our gears going with finding equality in the community and not feeling that shame and not being persecuted for being gay any longer. And then all of a sudden this disease comes along. And once again, the stigma came right back in. And there were some things said by certain people that were very derogatory towards people who had HIV and AIDS, that somehow we deserved it. And I don't believe that. I don't think it was a punishment from God. For me, it was a gift in a lot of ways because it helped me to develop to who I am today and to be the loving and accepting person that I am and be able to help other people. It's been a challenge, I'm not going to lie. I've been lucky. I was asked in my long-term survivor group the other night, because I am a 30-year survivor, what people thought was the reason for my health and wellness. 90%, my beliefs, what I believed. I was blessed with a wonderful woman. Here we go. Whenever I talk about my mother, it gets a little...
But she really helped you to be able to take the next steps and be able to find a way to move forward and to live.
Yes.
And to be able to help others.
When the doctors told her to get my stuff in order, after we left the office, she looked at me and she said, "Nobody dictates your fate, young man. You do that. And you are going to live if you choose to live." And that's what I chose. And when the early drugs came out and people were trying them, I tried them for like 3 days. It was the only drug they had was AZT. And it was a very toxic drug. And in the doses that they were giving it, it was really, really, really toxic. I made the decision after 3 days of taking it that if I had to choose between living like this for 10 years or living 10 days in a healthy state, because I was so sick from the drugs, I was going to choose the 10 days because I wanted to have quality of life while I was living, and I've always been a quality of life type person. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited until I knew that the cocktails had been tested and were showing good results. And through that time, I got into health and wellness and changed the way I was living my life. And through changing the way I lived my life, I changed the way I believed and I lived and I thought. Thinking was a big, big aspect of my wellness.
And I think it's interesting that you say that, because it's how people are thinking about HIV and AIDS and how they think about early detection. There are so many misconceptions still 30 years later that can prevent people from being healthy and getting into treatment. And Ashley, you work at the Access Program for Beth Israel-Deaconess. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important, number one, for early detection, and really what does anonymous testing mean? What would somebody expect if they were to come into your office to ensure, number one, that they're taking care of their health, number two, that their anonymity is protected?
Well, first off, when they call me, they can call me directly to schedule an appointment. They don't have to tell me their name. There's no health insurance involved. It's free. It's a rapid test, so it takes 20 minutes to get the results back, so they can leave my office knowing their test result. And I'll be there for any follow-up questions, some education, anything like that. But we work with the infectious disease specialist for the hospital, but she also has a primary care setting as well. So we're not in the hospital, we're off-site. So if you're coming into our office, it's not like an HIV clinic or anything like that. You can be...
It's a doctor's office.
Exactly, it's a doctor's office. You could be there for a variety of reasons. She's a primary care doctor, she's an infectious disease specialist. We're there on site, but no one knows you're seeing me for a test. It could be you're seeing Dr. Marglin for something, or I work for Dr. Marglin as her case manager. But it's not something that's so red flag, red flag. People know I have HIV, people know I'm here for a test. So it's really anonymous in that sense. I think a lot of people are scared to make that step of giving me a call because there's a lot of fear still involved. They don't want to know their status. They don't think they're at risk. Like you said, there's misconceptions of, I might not be at risk. I don't do this, I don't do drugs, I'm not gay. But the thing is, it's all about the behavior.
It's not who you are.
Right, you don't fit in this perfect little category that puts you at risk for HIV. It's what you do and how you conduct your life. So we always recommend everybody get a test. The CDC recommends that if you're between the ages of 13 and 64, you get tested once. If you have risk factors that might put you at risk more often. More routinely testing is encouraged. But I'm open to any calls, any questions. If someone's not ready for a test, all right, get back to me in a couple of weeks. But I'm there for education. So if someone comes back positive, I can help you get into care for yourself to live a long, healthy life. But if someone's not on medication and they're unaware of their status, they might be infecting other people without even realizing it. And that's a big issue for the community. So that's one thing. If you come back negative, you know your status moving forward for different relationships, and you can also get some education as to how to stay negative.
And I think one of the things that's important to mention too, that there is definitely a movement encouraging people to consider this just routine. That it's not,
absolutely.
It's not this huge fear, but knowing your status is part of being healthy.
Right.
And when you go in for an annual physical, for the other annual tests that you have, also having HIV testing, just to ensure you know your status so you can stay healthy, so you can make sure the people that you love stay healthy as well.
I've had an array of ages come in for tests, older, younger, and it's sort of an embarrassing thing to bring up with their provider. But they're there for you for these very reasons. If you want to get screenings for STIs, it shouldn't be an issue, but to them it's an issue. So they'd rather come to me anonymously, which is absolutely fine. But
it's
that's
more
always,
perception versus reality.
It's a roadblock for them to ask their doctor and make that step. So if they feel more comfortable in our type of setting, we encourage it. Knowing your status is our end goal. So.
And when we talked earlier too, I think the talking about misconceptions, there still is, how things change, how things stayed the same. I think one of the biggest issues still today, correct me if you two think I'm wrong, is stigma.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There's still a lot of shame surrounding the disease because it is an STI. But there shouldn't be, because the shame is what causes the silence. The silence is what causes the sickness. The best way to fight this disease is early detection and getting on the medications as early as possible before it attacks your CD4 cells. And I was blessed to have been able to wait to get on the cocktails, but I started my cocktail in 1999 when they came out with the best case scenario cocktails that were the 3 different drugs. And my first 10 years on the medications, my T cells I had dropped out, and I was around 250 in T cells. My T cells now are around 1,200, which is well above the normal range. The normal range for a healthy human being with a healthy immune system is 800 to 1,200 T cells.
And that's amazing. And that's the difference of taking medication and not taking medication.
And being very compliant. Compliance is very important.
And that's something I'd like to talk with both of you about when we come back. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with more of Building Community. Thank you for joining us.
The worst thing in those days was the continual drumbeat of death.
People were just dying all around us.
It just seemed like my whole existence was being wiped out.
As an HIV positive man, I just knew that I would be next.
I'm an AIDS long-term survivor.
I'm an AIDS long-term survivor.
I am an AIDS long-term survivor.
The worst of the AIDS epidemic was in the 80s and the 90s.
I went to a lot of memorials, a lot of tears.
I lost friends, lovers, family, you name it.
I literally froze in my own place for the fear that I would be next.
I fully expected to be dead.
I actually felt dying would have been the easiest thing to do, because then you wouldn't have to watch everybody dying.
In 1996, protease inhibitors came along and changed the game. People stopped dying in such huge numbers.
It's kind of this very mixed feeling.
It sounds like it should be one of those, oh, be grateful, have a party, you're gonna live. It was the exact opposite. It sent me into a tailspin.
I had huge amount of depression that I had to deal with.
Living through the last 34 years and losing everyone, I don't even know how to articulate how painful that is.
You cannot watch that many people die. You cannot watch the injustice that we watched and not have that affect you.
Once the worst of AIDS was over, things subsided, people were moving on with their lives, though that moving on was difficult for a lot of us.
AIDS survivor syndrome is a continuing sense of being caught in the death horizon.
46 to 48% of us deal with depression, suicidal thoughts and tendencies,
Anxiety, lack of future orientation, not being able to imagine being an old person.
The cause of AIDS survivor syndrome is multifaceted. It is physical, because of the chemicals that are in my body. It is psychological, because of mourning and loss and what I've gone through emotionally. And it is environmental, as I feel that my experience is being erased from the public record within my own lifetime.
society in general, when the medications came, shelved us all. They wanted us to shut up and go away.
The answer to AIDS survivor syndrome is let's kick ass.
Let's Kick Ass stands for Let's Kick AIDS Survivors Syndrome.
We're a grassroots movement of long-term survivors, both positive and negative, dedicated to ending isolation, reclaiming our lives, and imagining the future we never dreamed of.
When I found Let's Kick Ass, I felt this intense sense of relief.
It was like a bolt of light in an isolated darkness for me.
It's ended my depression, my anxiety, and my sleep disorder.
Let's Kick Ass has enabled my heart to open again in a way it had been really shut down for years.
It's actually given me a life in a community and love and things that if I start talking about too much, I'll tear up.
We are warriors.
We are warriors.
We are warriors.
We are warriors.
Let's kick ass.
Let's kick ass.
Let's kick ass.
Welcome back to Building Community. I'm Donna Rodriguez, your host. In this episode, we're talking about living with HIV, and I am joined by Patrick Langone and Ashley Frazier. Thank you again so much for being here with us today. I think this is such an important topic, and one that we already talked about in the first half of the show that we don't hear people talking about enough anymore. So being able to, you made reference before we went to break about being on medication and the significant difference it makes being on medications today, and now how people are living long, healthy lives with HIV as long as they know their status and as long as they're on medication. Could both of you talk a little bit about what that means? You made the reference of people having to follow a program with their doctors to be compliant. What does it mean to be compliant?
Well, for me, it means taking my meds every day, following up with my doctor every 3 months. They do blood work. Even though I'm healthy, they still do my blood work every 3 months. I also, as a holistic and wellness person, I take really good care. I watch what I eat, exercise as much as I possibly can, and it's all really important to keeping a healthy body is keeping a healthy mind as well. I also see a therapist. I do some spiritual coaching myself, so I felt that it was necessary for me to also go out and seek therapy as an important part of what I do in my work, as well as keeping my head straight. Because I do have some issues with a form of PTSD called AIDS survivor syndrome.
And they're finding now that many people who have been living with HIV for long periods of time, particularly folks like you who survived through that period when it originally was discovered, because it was so traumatic.
It was like living in a war zone. I lived in the South End at the time. You could walk up and down the street and just watching people disintegrate and lose weight and wasting syndrome and getting Kaposi's, and it was constant, never-ending watching the death, and it was hard. It was like being in a war zone, but it wasn't what everybody else saw. It was confined to those of us who were caregivers, as well as we were patients, but we had to be the caregivers as well, because there was such a stigma. People were afraid of us. Even in the medical community in the early years, there was a lot of discrimination against people with AIDS.
And misinformation.
And fear was one of the great killers. But we stuck by each other, and we really helped each other. But those of us who did survive, I mean, out of my group of friends of probably about 15 to 20 people, there's 2 of us left. And getting to the age, I just turned 50 a couple weeks ago, and getting to 50, a landmark for me, something I never ever imagined. But to look back and realize that a lot of my friends didn't and weren't able to be here. And it's a hard thing to live through. It's a hard thing to watch. I sometimes ask myself, why me? But then I stop and I realize you're here to speak for them. You're here to share their story.
And to help others to know where
others.
you've been and what's
get
important.
kids to get tested.
Yes. Because that's another part. We talked about silence equals death. And,
Yes.
and they're unfortunately, because of the stigmas still associated with HIV and AIDS, I think that's where we're starting to fall back into not talking enough and not having enough education. I remember in the early 90s, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing public service announcements on the sides of buses and in city halls and in the newspaper. And there was constant talk about safer sex. There was constant talk about keeping yourself healthy and talking to your partners and your family and your friends about HIV. So it's something that do you find now that it's no longer what we used to be considered a death sentence? It's a chronic disease.
It is.
People are living long lives with HIV. Do you think that is impacting young folks' ability to really understand how important it is to be safe?
Mm-hmm.
I think so, yeah. The medication is so tremendous. I mean, no one in my age group saw what was going on in the early 80s and how it really did impact the community. So going back to the beginning, a lot of people are just putting HIV on the side. There's not much education on it because it's not as profound as it used to be. It's still very much there. There's over 700 people in the Plymouth County living with HIV and AIDS. And just getting through to people to get tested is a tricky thing to do. But I definitely think more effort should be made. Doing this is a great outlet to get people more aware of a program that it exists. It's free, it's anonymous, it's not something that you should be scared of. HIV is part of, your regular screenings. So that's a part of how the Access Program approaches things. We just really want to get people to think about HIV, stop silencing it. It's there, Now,
I'd be curious to know when each of you talk to people, in the community, if you're talking about HIV, you're talking about health and wellness, what are the common misperceptions the two of you run into with people? And is it different based on somebody's age, the misperceptions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Prevention is a big thing. But abstinence-only teachings is not going to prevent this disease. Teaching use of condoms is very important. Even with the development of PrEP, which is a drug that's a prophylactic drug, they still suggest that you still engage in safe sex, even if not for HIV. For STDs in general, HPV is on the rise, hepatitis C is on the rise, and when you have HIV and Hep C or HPV, it just exacerbates the problem. So prevention first, and if we can't prevent it, letting people know that it is not a death sentence anymore. You can live a long, healthy, productive, independent life like I have. I have a loving partner who we've been together for 20 years. On my 50th birthday, we celebrated that. And he's negative. And just because you're positive does not mean you will never. Finding that information out does not keep you from having a healthy relationship, whether it's with another positive person or with a negative person. You will go on living life. You will just have to modify things. Healthy living, taking your medications, seeing
early
your doctor.
detection, very
Early
much.
detection.
Yep. Because, I mean, HIV turns into AIDS, it progresses into AIDS. At that point, your immune system is, it's so weakened, and you're more susceptible to certain illnesses. To avoid that, know your status early, get on medication. That way, for yourself, living a long, healthy life, start seeing a specialist, and you're also helping the community knowing your status, so you're not infecting other people without being aware of it. 1 out of 5 people with HIV have it, are unaware of it. So it's that percentage of people that contribute to many of the new infections each year in the United States. So just getting that 20-minute test, you can really do wonders for yourself and the community overall.
And when you say there are over 700 people who are positive in Plymouth County, those are people who know they're positive. That's
Yes.
not how
And
many
they're
people are
yes.
positive in Plymouth
Yep.
County.
Right.
And they estimate, I mean, I've heard crazy numbers, everything from 1 in 5 college students to 1 in 4 college students has some type of sexually transmitted disease and is not aware.
I think the young folks think, won't happen to me, won't happen to me. But if people all have that mindset, then it might actually happen to you, But it is getting the younger folks to sort of take charge of their health. Yeah, I want to know my status for me, and just give me a call. But then there's the stigma and the fear that starts to play into things.
Now, believe it or not, we're actually starting to, we're getting towards the end of this episode, and I want to ask each of you, what are the things that you say to teens and young adults, whether through counseling, through your work as a healer? What are the most important things you want younger people to think about in protecting their own health?
Well, first and foremost, practicing safe sex, like I said, use of condoms, and also positive thinking is very important. When I first tested positive, I didn't even want to get my test. My doctor made me get my test because I was sick at the time. I believed because I was in a healthy monogamous relationship that there was no possible way I could have contracted the virus. But my partner didn't know he had it. He didn't mean to infect me, but he did. And the doctor who was working with me at that time was wonderful enough to know the symptoms and talk me into getting that test. But now we have such advances. In the early years, it was the Western blot test that it could be, you can get a false positive all the time. Don't worry about it. And a lot of us walked away saying, I'm not going to, when I get sick, I'll worry about it. Bad move. Because once you get sick, your immune system is depleted.
Yep.
And there's not much they can do to help you at that point. That's when opportunistic infections take over your body. And coming back from that is really, really hard. I was blessed that my opportunistic infections that I did experience, I caught them early. Early detection, early detection, early detection.
Yeah, I think I'd encourage anybody, the young folks in particular, to have the conversation with your partner. Just don't be, it shouldn't be one of those topics you don't want to talk about that's embarrassing. I mean, you guys are sexually active. Let's talk about the stuff that comes with being sexually active.
Let's talk about being healthy and protecting each other's health.
HIV doesn't always come across with symptoms. You could be sitting next to somebody you didn't know had HIV, but everybody thinks, oh, I would know they had HIV or AIDS. But that's usually not the case. You get in a relationship with someone, you love them, you don't think that they have any, illnesses or sicknesses that you could be at risk for. But getting the test is the only way you know.
Yep. When I first met my partner, I am one of many in the community of HIV positive people who believes in honesty and openness about my disease. There's a lot of people, because of the stigma and their position in the community, that can't be that open about it. When I first met my partner, that night that we went on our first date, I was like, you don't want to date me. And he was like, why? And I was like, I'm HIV positive. And he goes, so what? And I was like, does that mean you are too? And he goes, no, but I'm not afraid of it. I know what we need to do. I like you as a person. I want to get to know who you are. I am not my disease by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm never going to be quiet about my disease, because if helping one soul is all I get, that's perfect for me.
In
If I can
20
help
years.
a lot of them.
And 20 years later, you're living healthfully, happily, in a loving relationship with a wonderful man. And
2 wonderful dogs.
And I'd like to thank both of you so much for being here today, for being part of this conversation. I think, as we've been saying throughout this half hour, the conversation is what needs to take place first.
Yes.
We have to be open, we have to get past stigma, and we have to find a way for all of us to live healthy lives. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for this episode of Building Community. For additional resources and replay times, please visit pactv.org. And if you have additional show ideas, comments, or questions, feel free to email me directly at buildingcommunity@pactv.org. Thank you.